Hello, everybody, and welcome to coverage of our second quarterfinals of the 2024 Fall Brawl Top 8. I'm Michael Hoyp. I will be covering this match between Cameron Heise and Marc Flore. So Cameron is on the Replenish list while Marc is piloting the Mono Blue Stiflenought. This should be a fun matchup. There are a lot of things that can go in different ways. Could be a very quick match. Could also be a long, drawn-out one. So we'll see how things play out. Let's try and learn a little bit about our players. So the structure of this tournament, the players play 8 rounds. It's broken out into 2 different pods. So the first pod, they play 4 opponents, and then they are seeded into that second pod based on their standing. So if they do well, they are playing against opponents who also did very well. And then they play 4 more rounds. And so Cameron went 8-0 and finished the second seed. I think there were 3 8-0 players in our top 8. And so he's piloting the Replenish list. He thinks that it is most favored against red aggro and mid-range strategies, but could struggle against Stiflenought and control decks. And unfortunately for Cameron, he is facing off against a Mono Blue Stiflenought list. So maybe he has his work cut out for him. But I know definitely the power of the Replenish deck. I wouldn't count it out. Just because it's something that is described as a bad matchup doesn't mean it can't win. That's definitely for sure. The sideboard MVP that Cameron listed is Fact or Fiction. He said, Fact or Fiction always impresses. I know we had seen Danny earlier today who was playing Replenish, and that was one of the cards that he has noted that he was always trying to fit into a 75, but Danny couldn't find room. So Cameron has a little bit different of a list, and he does have that Fact or Fiction, which has been really good for Cameron out of the sideboard. So Cameron is a banker out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and again, he is the second seed with that 8-0 finish. And let's find, okay, a little bit more about Cameron. So he said that he chose Replenish because he thought it was well positioned in the current metagame. I know a lot of us talked about this deck before LobsterCon, and while most people, I think, didn't feel like it had done that well at LobsterCon, Cameron is one of the pilots that played Replenish and took it to a top 8 at LobsterCon. So again, here he is playing it in the Fall Brawl with more success. Would you make any changes? He says not right now, and that is definitely understandable with the amount of success that he's had in the recent tournaments that he's played in. Any exciting moments? He described a full turn 3 combo lock on the play, and he said Reanimator was his toughest matchup in the Swiss, which is interesting because Reanimator is not a deck that I've seen too much of in the metagame. It was something maybe I'd seen in like the early 2020s, but I think it's kind of been phased out. So interesting to see that is a deck that has been doing well against such a tier 1 deck. So interesting to see if Reanimator maybe has some play against a deck like Replenish. And then Cameron says he likes to play recreational chess, though he says he's not very good, and likes to spend time with kids that are 3 and 6, which I do agree 3 and 6 are very fun ages for your children. So let's see. Why should people root for you? He says, I'm all about roots. To your question, beats me. I don't care at all. So if you like puns, then maybe Cameron is the one to root for. So moving on to Marc. Marc is a analyst out of South Burnwick, Maine. He finished 7-1 and is the 7th seed. He is piloting the Mono Blue Stiflenought list. And as this page is a little bit more blank, he said, favored verse. He said, everyone knows this deck by now. And yeah, he was kind of joking when we were just chatting. He's like, I can't really add. I think everyone knows kind of this deck. It's been on and off the metagame, and we've seen it a lot recently. He didn't really feel that he could add to anything that people don't already know. He does have an Ivory Tower in the sideboard that he's really enjoyed. There are some additions or changes to the 75 that I think Marc is trying out. There's some main deck inclusions, and I think sideboard cards are a little bit different than I've seen. So it'll be interesting to see if those have any impact on this matchup and anything that may come towards him further in the top 8. Marc said he started playing the Mono Blue Stiflenought list 6 months ago, and he's loved it and been making changes. Ivory Tower has been to the sideboard, and it overperformed, so he's now playing 2 copies. Phyrexian Furnace is a card he's been testing. He has one of those in the main, and he's off of Daze, which is interesting because it's definitely a card that like has a lot of play. But I guess if people all respect Daze, then you don't really actually need to have it. Though maybe in this open deck format, that is something that might change. That maybe he misses it, given that Cameron knows he doesn't have it. Would you make any changes? He says he wants to try Tide, so Parallax Tide in the sideboard, but he's not very excited about Chain of Vapor. Obviously, Chain of Vapor is not as good after a Dreadnought resolves, but the 1 mana is a lot different than 2 if you're talking about Chain of Vapor and Boomerang if you're looking to Chain of Vapor and Parallax Tide. Favorite hobby outside of Magic? He says Ultimate Frisbee and Disc Golf. And people should root for him because he's a pilot that hasn't won any events, and he's not playing the most optimized version of the deck. So I guess him willing to try out different things is always kind of fun. And he would like to say, this community is amazing. I love these webcam events. It was fun meeting people at LobsterCon in real life. All right, so let's take a quick look at these deck lists, and then we will jump down to the match. All right, first up, we have the deck list for Cameron. So this is the Replenish list. Looking at it, it is a pretty stock list. I think the one notable inclusion is the copy of Riftstone Portal. So that's a land that taps for colorless, but if it's in your graveyard, then all your lands have the ability to tap for green or white. And that can mean that all like the ancient tombs you can tap without taking damage. Skycloud Expanse could tap to make white instead of just being able to filter. I guess fetch lands maybe in a late game situation, you don't have to crack it. And so given that the deck discards cards with Attunement, Frantic Search, and maybe there's a weird world where you intuition for it, there's a lot of ways to get it into the graveyard. There are copies of Mana Leak in the main, which has been in and out. I think it's been trending upward, but that is one of the inclusions that Cameron has. So pretty stock list that we see for the Replenish list. Let's move over to the Stiflenought. So a couple of copies of Powder Keg and Phyrexian Furnace that are different. So the Dazes being gone is an interesting omission, and there's a copy of Cunning Wish, which gives a little bit of flexibility to access to the sideboard in game 1. But Marc's game plan is going to be the same. He's going to try and assemble a Dreadnought plus a Stifle or a Vision Charm and ride that to victory. Foils and counterspells are going to protect it. He has 2 copies of Flash of Insight in the main, which I guess gives it a little bit more staying power. So I think Marc has the ability to go a little bit longer game than most Stiflenought versions that I've seen. So we'll see how that plays out in this matchup. All right, we'll jump down to the match and let our players know that they can begin. So Cameron is the higher seed. That gives him the option to play first, which I am going to guess that he is going to take advantage of. So Cameron on the left with the Replenish list, while Marc is on the right with the Stiflenought. First turn, Flooded Strand is going to immediately crack. I can't even remember what the interaction pieces that Cameron has for 1 mana are on his list. I'm going to pull up his text list so I can reference it while I'm commentating. I guess the maybe if there's not just a proactive play, just the ability to prevent Marc from stifling that fetch land activation. So I think that is probably the reasoning for that immediate fetch. And then there is a turn 1 Portent for Marc, and it looks like he's shuffling the cards, didn't like what he had seen, so he's going to get a fresh random card off the top of his deck after he passes the turn. So a lot of these early turns, so Cameron has both the ability to win quickly if he gets like the Opalescence and the Parallax Wave, or Parallax Tide kind of resolved. Or he can go for a longer game. He has cards like Swords of Plowshares and Seal of Cleansing, which are both good combatants to a Resolved Dreadnought. So Cameron kind of has the flexibility to play both an early and a long game, while Marc kind of needs to play a mid to late game. You're going to be a little bit worried if you go for the early Dreadnought, because there are a number of answers. So the cards like Mana Leak, Seal of Cleansing, and Swords of Plowshares are all of ways to cheaply interact with a Resolved Dreadnought. And then even a card like Parallax Wave is a more expensive answer. So Marc, I think, has to be a little bit more conservative, maybe of before he commits his 2-card combo. All right, so Cameron's just played some basic lands. The plains, so 2 islands and a plains. So far hasn't cast any spells. If he's playing a long game, it's kind of interesting, because it typically in a long game you always want to add extra lands to the board. That will make you being able to play multiple spells on a turn, or maybe protect things with a counterspell. But with a Replenish deck, having cards like Attunement and Frantic Search incentivize you to keep extra lands in your hand so that you can discard them. So there's always like a tension whether you want to play extra lands or keep them in your hand. Here Cameron's going to tap out to play Parallax Tide, and it looks like it resolves against Marc. So we'll remove a fading counter so that we can exile the land. So this is a good note that if Cameron's trying to go a more aggressive route and an end game early, having this Parallax Tide in play is really good, because obviously he can keep Marc off of mana for a number of turns. So the window is definitely open for Cameron to kind of push through and find like this Replenish combo. He'll add Attunement, which he's going to use immediately. He'll draw 3 cards, and then he's going to have to choose and discard 4. This could set up like an immediate like Replenish pile if he's going like Opalescence and Parallax Wave, or if he's just digging for more resources, then maybe different cards get discarded. So I see an Intuition discarded. I see 2 blue cards and a white one, and I'm not sure which ones they are. So I'm not sure exactly what's in the graveyard. I guess I do see a wave. That one's there for certain. And then Cameron's also going to add an Adarkar Wastes to the board. So he's potentially representing Mana Leak, also Swords of Plowshares. Marc, not having a land drop, is going to go to discard. He's going to discard a Dreadnought. So things are looking really good for Cameron, especially if he's able to assemble the combo. Assuming that he has a Mana Leak, he'd be able to cast a card like Replenish, which we see here, and have Mana Leak as a backup for a card like Foil, which could be cast from Marc without having any mana. So the Replenish looks like this is resolving, given... Oh, I guess maybe... Okay, we're checking... There is a foil check, so a Vision Charm and an Island, but yes, there is that Mana Leak ready. Cameron will happily take 2 damage from his Ancient Tomb so that he can resolve that Mana Leak and thus resolve the Replenish. And Marc has seen enough, and we will pick it up and move to game 2. So we are planning on playing a best of 5 for this match. So the first 2 games are going to be without Sideboard. So the only thing that's really going to change is that Marc gets to be on the play, which is a big deal. But again, like given the nature of the matchup, like Marc still has to play, I think, a more conservative game. He could just try and jam and hope that Cameron doesn't have a Seal of Cleansing or a Swords to Plowshares. But if he thinks that Cameron is representing those, then maybe he has to play things a little bit slower. Yeah, and it's always interesting because Cameron typically isn't going to be doing a lot in the first few turns, so it's the opportunity cost of him representing a mana leak is pretty easy. He'll pretty likely have 2 mana open on turn 2, which Marc at least has to think about. If I'm tapping out to play my combo, I'm weak to Swords to Plowshares, Seal, and mana leak, which would be an easy 2-for-1 if Cameron had any of those cards. So we'll see how aggressively Marc plays these early turns of the second game. So I'm looking at Marc's main deck, and so the things that are a little bit different. So the most notable exclusion is the lack of dazes, as I talked about earlier. So there's one less impulse. There's only 3 copies. 2 copies of Flash of Insight, which is, I think there's usually 1, and sometimes maybe I've seen 2. But there's a Phyrexian Furnace, which could be kind of interesting if it comes down early. Though I think Replenish has the ability to kind of Attunement and Frantic Search are ways to dump a bunch of cards at once. I'll come back after we say Marc has added 2 islands, and Cameron has just added an island and an Adarkar Waste. So at the end of Cameron's second turn, Marc is going to opt. Going back, the 2 Powder Keg doesn't hit enchantments, so unfortunately for Marc, that's a card that doesn't interact very well. Though I guess if there's an Opalescence in play that makes everything creatures, I guess I'm trying to think with the timing. If it were at 4 and you activate it, yeah, I guess that could work. That maybe if an early Powder Keg comes down, that could do something against the combo. So more land goes. Marc adds an island while Cameron adds a Flooded Strand, and then Marc's going to add a 4th island on his 4th turn. Cameron's going to add. Now I'm questioning whether. I'm trying to think if there's a Skycloud Expanse that's gold bordered. I think there might be. So now I'm trying to question if that's a Flooded Strand or a Skycloud Expanse. I do think it is a Flooded Strand. That one for sure is, given that it's fetched. And that fetch is going to resolve, given that Cameron has picked up his deck, I think. All right, so Cameron cracks 1 fetch, but not the other. Now he adds an Ancient Tomb. He's going to... Oh, so that one is a Skycloud Expanse. So, all right. So there are gold-bordered versions of both. This one is going to hard cast an Opalescence. So this is kind of a nice way, if your opponent is playing Permission, and especially if they're giving you time, you can kind of play the Replenish deck in a different order. You're not really going for a combo. You're more, I'm going to play out my threats one by one, and if I just resolve Opalescence and then Parallax Wave, then I have a really good, we'll call the combo, the thing that you were trying to assemble anyways, and you just do it a natural way. But now if Marc is having to spend the resources here on just countering this Opalescence, because it makes Parallax Wave or just really any other enchantment into a threat because it's a creature, all right, now that Marc has used a foil, and there's 1 less counterspell that is available for a card like Replenish. So Cameron can kind of play an attrition game in that way. That's all under the assumption that Marc doesn't have any pressure, but that is the case that we're in right now. So things that might make Marc be more aggressive is if he gets to a full hand and he has a Dreadnought and maybe he only has one piece of protection, or maybe he doesn't have any, but if he's having to discard, then maybe it's something that he's willing to risk it, or to say, all right, this is how I have to get the Swords to Plowshares out of your hand, if he was going to discard anyway and lose some resources that way. But right now he's still able to play lands and hasn't had a discard yet. So new Opalescence is coming down on Cameron's next turn, and Marc is going to Gush in response. So he's going to float 2 blue mana, and then he's going to show a Counterspell. So the indication that if he had to Gush, that he didn't have that to begin with. So maybe Marc is lower on the permission at this point. He'll add one of those islands back to the board, and then he's going to cast a Portent. I do believe we are keeping the cards this time. Or maybe Marc is still contemplating. All right, we'll pass the turn. Marc will draw a card, as does Cameron. And we'll see if Cameron is going to try pose a threat. So, like, this is kind of a sequence. Like, if you just go Opalescence, those get countered. Maybe you get a card like Parallax Tide. And suddenly, okay, now it's really hard for Marc to do stuff, because at I'll say any point, but it would have to be in the near future, because you would have to remove all the fading counters to get rid of all of Marc's lands, and that kind of opens the door for Cameron to go for a combo. But the other thing he could play, if he just played out a wave, a Parallax Wave, then Cameron has a lot of protection against a Dreadnought that would come down. Because Marc basically can't play a Dreadnought in the next 5 turns, because easy removal of one counter, even if it was temporary, if it were to come back from a Parallax Wave, Marc would need to have a Vision Charm or a Stifle, because the trigger would come back. All right, so the test spell here, we have Frantic Search. This is floating a mana, so we've used the Ancient Tomb again. So Cameron is generating mana with this Frantic Search. Cards he's discarding is an Opalescence, and I believe it was a land, but I didn't quite see. Kind of interesting that given that we've seen Marc use 2 counterspells on the Opalescence, that Cameron is discarding a third one, because if Marc is interested in countering the first 2, then I would imagine that he's interested in countering the third. So maybe Cameron has a bigger card that he's trying to resolve, like a card like Replenish, which we do see. Marc is going to respond with an Opt, so not necessarily a confident play. I think that is a card that he knew from Portent, so that one goes to the bottom, and then he'll draw a new card, which I still think is a card that Marc knew what he was from the Portent, unless I've missed my turns. He does have a counterspell, okay. But does Cameron have a Mana Leak? Again, he does. So Mana Leak is going to counter the counterspell, and if Marc doesn't have a foil, then this Replenish is going to resolve, and it looks like we're going to put 3 Opalescence and an Attunement into play. So not like a game-ending Replenish, as we say, but this, given that all these enchantments are creatures, it is a near lethal amount. I guess it's 3 4/4s and a 3/3, so we're attacking for 15 in a turn. So from this position, I mean, even if Marc was to resolve a Dreadnought, you'd be able to attack for swing in what 11 of it would get through, 11 and then 5, so that's not quite enough. So with as the board sits and assuming Cameron has nothing in his hand, Marc would be able to kind of, I think, stabilize with a Dreadnought. That would have to be a Dreadnought with a Stifle and not a Dreadnought with a Vision Charm. But that also means that Cameron needs to have no Swords of Plowshares, no Seal of Cleansing, no Parallax Wave. So a lot of conditional things of Marc able to stabilize. So not a good position for Marc. And also Cameron able to cash in that Attunement at any point if Cameron really needs to dig. All right, Marc's going to go for it. There is a Dreadnought, and I would imagine it has to be a Stifle here. Because if it's a Vision Charm, which it looks like it is, that is, that's going to phase out the Dreadnought, which would not allow it to block on this next turn. So maybe there's a second Dreadnought? No. So yeah, if Marc is passing the turn here, yeah, I don't like I don't like Marc's odds. All right, so Cameron is going to... I feel like I would want to start by attacking, but maybe... I guess if he doesn't kill him this turn and doesn't have an answer to the Dreadnought, the Dreadnought is lethal. Cameron did take a bunch of damage from fetches and the Ancient Tomb. So here he's going to tap that Ancient Tomb one more time, go down to 9. He's going to cast a Parallax Wave, and this would be a great answer to that Dreadnought. But if, I mean, and I have to imagine, unless Marc just drew a Counterspell, that this is going to resolve because the Replenish was played last turn. Yeah, because Stifle could counter one of the activations, but you'd be able to do it multiple times. All right, Marc has a Flash of Insight for 1. So this is going to look at he's just going to get the top card and hope it's a foil. Yeah, that would have been a better dig if that card was already in the graveyard. He would have been able to use 2 mana and then at least see like 6 cards deep. But yeah, that Parallax Wave is going to resolve, and now all these cards get to attack. So it looks like we're not attacking with everything, but I guess with the wave you'd be able to basically untap your cards. So a conservative attack from Cameron, though I guess I don't know if it's necessary. We'll attack for 11. This Dreadnought comes back. It is a very sad Dreadnought, as it is not going to be in play very long. probably because of this Parallax Wave, and I think it's very likely that we will be moving to our sideboards after Marc concedes. So we'll see if there, because I can't think of anything in his list that would get him out of the situation. Once all these cards have resolved, the Dreadnought deck doesn't do as good of dealing with a board state. It's much better of either winning the game quickly, preventing your opponent from doing what they want to do, or like protecting the queen kind of thing and applying the pressure here. And all those things aren't the path to victory for Marc, given that stuff has already happened. So, all right, opt. We'll put a card on the bottom. We'll take a look, and I'm looking to see what we could have. We're gonna flash our insight. We're gonna look. So a Boomerang wouldn't do it because there's too many Opalescences. A Cunning Wish. There's no Ensnare. That is the card I'm looking to see if that was in the sideboard. Gush could get... Yeah, I would say resolving another Dreadnought isn't going to do anything because of the Parallax Wave. Yeah, I think Marc is just dead. I don't think he has any outs, at least not that I can see. All right. Marc's going to peek. I guess he gets a little bit of information in terms of the cards that were in Cameron's hand. It gives a little bit of information, maybe how he played out the game. But yeah, peek will show Marc a new card, show Cameron's hand. But again, unless I'm missing something, I think this game is done. Okay, that's what we see. Cards get scooped up from Marc. Cameron takes game 2. A little bit different than game 1, but really it just looked like Cameron, especially with that mana leak, being able to protect his spell, just being able to hit his land drops, play a key spell, and counter it. And Marc either didn't have or wasn't willing to commit an early Dreadnought. And pretty clinical 2-0 for those first 2 games for Cameron. So that means we are now looking at the sideboard for these players. I have the sideboard up for Marc, the Mono Blue Stiflenought list. So we have 2 Hydroblast, 3 Annul, 2 Brain Freeze, 1 Blue Elemental Blast, 2 Ivory Tower, 1 Hibernation, 1 Misdirection, 2 Sabo's Web, and 1 Phyrexian Furnace. All right. So I think the biggest question here is, how good is your main plan of playing a Dreadnought, like obviously resolving it with like a Stifle or a Vision Charm and then protecting it? Is that a reasonable path to victory? Because the alternate way is to say, I am going to bring in 2 copies of Brain Freeze and just become a control deck that is going to try and mill you out. And when I've played this matchup before, I had taken out all the Dreadnoughts and went for that Brain Freeze plan. Sometimes the game, I mean, you could usually make the game go pretty long, and but sometimes it doesn't go as long as you want. And so I think when I've talked to people, I think they talk about leaving some number of Dreadnoughts in, and that is also because you end up in a point where you have so many cards in your hand that you end up like discarding anyways. You have like a bunch of reactive cards, and you might as well try and resolve a Dreadnought with like a Vision Charm or whatnot to at least have that chance of getting that easy win. So I would like to see Marc go for like a little bit of a hybrid approach where he has some number of dreadnoughts and also had the brain freeze. He can bring in the Annuls, which is a cheap answer to the enchantments. It doesn't solve the ultimate problem of a card like Replenish, but it's a way to like slow them down and also protect against a card like Parallax Tide, which is really disruptive against your mana. I think he's going to bring in the Annuls. And then a Phyrexian Furnace is also just like a pretty innocent, low opportunity cost. You could play it for one, and then it could potentially really change the way that Cameron has to play. Like if that game goes really long, then you no longer have the ability to dig early with a card like Attunement or Frantic Search, and then you utilize those cards later. You kind of have to sequence that you activate them right away when you're going to combo off, and that isn't necessarily always how maybe Cameron wants to play out. So I won't say that like Phyrexian Furnace is like a huge game changer. Again, there was one in the main deck, but it is something that if it's drawn at the right time and the way the game plays out, it might change how Cameron plays. So I would see that. Other than that, I don't think I would plan on seeing the other cards. Maybe a misdirection, though I'm not sure if it's not great. It goes against the Mana Leak. And a lot of times when I've seen misdirection, there's Mishra's Factories in the list that you can like redirect a Swords of Plowshares to a Mishra's Factory. Marc doesn't have the Mishra's Factory, so he doesn't have that option. So it'll be interesting to see if he brings in more than just the Annuls and the Brain Freeze, and I think probably the Phyrexian Furnace. But let's take a look at the sideboard for Cameron. Cameron has 2 Orim's Chant, 3 Meddling Mage, 1 Swords, 2 Factor Fiction, 1 Stifle, 2 Chill, 2 Blue Elemental Blast, and 2 Annul. So a lot more there. I'll talk about that a little more as our players have started playing. I'll jump down to the match. There are a lot of cards that Cameron can bring in. It'll be really interesting to see kind of how he's digesting this matchup and how he wants to play it. But Orim's Chant seems good. Meddling Mage also seems good. Another Swords is something that is good if Marc is on the Dreadnought plan. Factor Fiction, I don't think is needed. Stifle, I don't think is needed. And then Annul is also another card that if Cameron is thinking that Marc is on that Dreadnought plan, that he might want to play. I guess Stifle does interact with Brain Freeze. So there are a lot of cards that play that Cameron could be. I think Cameron's sideboarding path is a lot more convoluted and has a lot more flexibility, so it'll be interesting to see what he does. Turn 1 Portent, and then a turn 2 Portent by Marc. Well, Cameron had the Flooded Strand for the island. A quiet first few turns. Cameron's now, well, maybe not. Cameron's going to go for a turn 2 Attunement thanks to Ancient Tomb. All right, and then Marc is going to add another island and then pass the turn again. Cameron is going to activate the Attunement. He's asking, does this resolve? Obviously, Marc has Stifles in his list. So he's respecting that option. We'll see what he discards. Yeah, Attunement's a card where it's like really easy. Like the first half is really fun. You get to pick it up and draw a bunch of cards, and then the discarding 4 cards is a little bit harder a lot of the times. 4 is a lot, and it can be difficult to maybe map out exactly what you want to do and how you're gonna pitch those cards. All right, so Cameron is going to discard, I think it's a swords. I think that is a fact or fiction. And then 2 parallax waves. So I think that timing of that attunement makes it seem that Cameron was looking for lands, but sometimes it's hard to tell. All right, so he adds an Adarkar Waste, and now he's going to spend 2 mana to cast a Meddling Mage. I'm going to check with the players to see what card is named, assuming that this resolves. Yeah, because I mean, it could be whether if Cameron thinks that Marc is on the Dreadnought plan, or maybe he's saying like, I have the Dreadnought plan covered with swords and seal cleansing and parallax wave, and I'm more worried about a card like Brain Freeze. Or it could be like, maybe I just want you to not be able to cast the card Counterspell or Foil, and make it easier for me to resolve my combo. A lot of different options, and I think all are legitimate, and a lot of it would depend exactly what Cameron is holding in his hand, but then also maybe just like how he plans on attacking this game. Marc is going to respond with his 1 of Cunning Wish. That could... He's going to get a misdirection. So the timing of this is really interesting because like, oh, maybe the Meddling Mage resolved and then he casts the Cunning Wish. I was thinking that the Cunning Wish was in response of a Meddling Mage, which like Cameron is not going to name a 1 of Cunning Wish. But I don't think that was the timing. I think I misunderstood that. All right, so I'm checking with the players to see if they can let me know what card was named. Marc is going to add a Phyrexian Furnace to the board. Misdirection was the card's name. Oh, no. Okay. All right. So Marc said misdirection, and then Cameron said Phyrexian Dreadnought. So yes, I think Marc was thinking, can you confirm what card was got with the Cunning Wish? I was asking about the Meddling Mage. All right. Yeah, Phyrexian Dreadnought was the card named with the Meddling Mage. The Meddling Mage does get to go on the offensive with nothing standing in his way. So 2 damage at a time, Cameron will be able to chip away. And now he's going to add a Parallax Wave. So again, this is a card that I think it's tough for Marc because it's like, if you have a limited amount of counter spells, like you don't want to counterspell this. Sorry, Parallax Tide, as I get my 4 mana enchantments mixed up. If the Tide resolves, then obviously it's going to be a lot harder to counter any of the subsequent spells, especially if Cameron plays them right after this. But if you are short on counter spells and you use it on a Tide, and then just opens up the door for Cameron to jam a more important spell, then you can be kind of even in a worse position. All right, so Marc's going to get to work with the Phyrexian Furnace. It's going to get rid of a land. I'm not sure if it's... I guess that's the Flooded Strand that was used on turn 1. All right, Meddling Mage is going to get in there again. And the Tide is at 1 counter. It's exiled 3 lands. So there's 1 counterspell available for Marc. Cameron is going to use the City of Traitors, an island, to cast an Attunement. And Marc is going to use an Annul. All right, so Marc maybe trying to limit the card draw. I guess if you're able to prevent your opponent from like killing you in the next few turns, then the Tide will at least give you the lands back. So maybe kind of trying to slow Cameron down has more benefit in that spot because of the Tide. Yeah, the Furnace gets to work, is going to get rid of a Swords of Plowshares. And now we do see a Powder Keg. So this is something that can deal with a Meddling Mage here after it ticks up to 2. But then I guess really the other interaction is if Opalescence comes into play, then you can use it because it on its own does not get rid of enchantments. I may be losing count of this Meddling Mage. I might, but I have Marc at 14. I might have missed an attack or so. We're going to try for another Tide. So Marc's currently tapped out since he played the Powder Keg. Cameron is going to exile the 2 islands that were in play. I guess we should keep those in separate piles. Is probably what I would want to do. 2 of them are under the one that has counters, and then 3 of them are under the one that is dying. So Cameron's upkeep, he can't remove a fading counter. Those 3 come back into play. Meddling Mage will still attack. Looks like I missed a Adarkar Wastes activation, I think, from Cameron. Otherwise, my life total was correct. So Phyrexian Furnace gets used. It's going to exile one of the waves. So the Furnace is doing a good job of whittling away at the graveyard. So if this Meddling Mage isn't able to go the distance, which Marc has the ability just to say no with the Powder Keg, then I mean, Cameron, I think, would just need to be like, okay, I have a Frantic Search and an Attunement or whatever, and put a bunch of cards in play in the graveyard at once. Marc would be able to get rid of a bottom card and then 1 card of his choice if he had an available mana. So it's not the hardest card to play around. Marc's going to add a second Furnace, so after he uses the Keg. And we'll see if Cameron is going to try and get aggressive or if this is in for a long game. So he added a mana, or 2 mana, I guess, with the City of Traitors, and then added a plane to the board. So we have 2 colorless mana floating, and there's a new Meddling Mage in play. I am going to assume that if this one were resolved, that Cameron would also be naming Phyrexian Dreadnought again. But maybe something in his mind has changed and he might prioritize a different card. Marc might not want that Meddling Mage to resolve. There's going to be 2 mana and then a Gush. So 2 mana floating, and Marc is going to see 2 new cards. Presumably looking for a counterspell, I think is the cleanest answer in this spot. But a foil is the card that Marc has. An island, I didn't see what the other card was discarded, but Cameron has a mana leak, but I believe Marc had 2 floating blue mana and he has an island available. So unless I'm misunderstanding something, Marc is able to pay for this mana leak? Did I miss something that happened in between? Well, this this foil is gonna get played discarding a misdirection and an island. I guess the misdirection is not a card that Marc could have played because normally you can use misdirection on a counterspell, but Cameron still has a colorless floating because he used the City of Traitors. He used one of those for the mana leak, but he has the Ancient Tomb and a colorless. So misdirecting a mana leak, I guess it would change the spell anyways to itself. Yeah, the mana leak would be targeting the misdirection, so he could use the misdirection rather than the foil. But the Meddling Mage is going to get countered, and then the Phyrexian Furnaces are going to get to work. All right, we've cast a lot of spells this turn, so we're going to show a brain freeze here. So now we're going back to thinking how many spells that have been played. We kicked things off with a Meddling Mage. Was that the only thing that Cameron played? I think he started with Meddling Mage, yes. And then Marc had a Gush and a foil. There was a mana leak, there was a foil, and there was a brain freeze. So I'm counting 6 spells, so 18 cards. Kind of working. Things are working against each other, I guess, if Phyrexian Furnace and Brain Freeze are together. But we're going through. Do you see a Stifle? Did see an Orim's Chant. But a chunk of the graveyard goes to, or a chunk of Cameron's library goes to the graveyard, and Marc gets to untap. So obviously that was a Brain Freeze that like did a chunk, but if we're here, what do we need to happen to win the game? We would still need a second Brain Freeze. We need a number of spells being cast. And that isn't a little bit difficult for Marc, given that he only has 2 lands now. I mean, he had already had to pick up the lands for the Gush because I think he was protecting against the Meddling Mage. But it just makes it even that much harder to finish off Cameron. All right, we've got a third Meddling Mage. I don't think Marc has the resources here to counter this one, so this is going to resolve. And Cameron is letting us know. This one he named Brain Freeze. Okay, so I think given what we see, or maybe just the cards that Cameron has in hand, I mean, that makes sense that like if you kind of see how Marc played that first Brain Freeze, it's probably the only way that you're going to lose. And also, yeah, if he has a card like Swords of Plowshares or something in his hand, You have a check for Dreadnought. All right, so lands come back. But the Meddling Mage is chipping away. We are at 10 to 13. Furnaces are going to do a little bit of damage, I guess. It'll be interesting to see like when Marc feels that he needs to cash those in for extra cards. I mean, I guess at this point he's looking to bounce the Meddling Mage and yeah, I would say I think he's got to bounce the Meddling Mage and then Brain Freeze is kind of the path to victory here. We have a counterspell that was on Replenish. Yeah, I'm just trying to look at the interaction cards that Marc would have. There is a Boomerang. There's going to be another Powder Keg. Marc is casting I think it was a Flash of Insight. So that's a card that is really good in the spot that you're able to kind of juice up your hand, especially with so many cards in the graveyard that you're able to really dig deep with that flashback. So if I'm marking, I'm thinking my game plan, okay, one, if I'm brain freezing, I'm going to have to get this Meddling Mage off the board. So my ways to do that are one Boomerang, there's one more Powder Keg. We already used the Cunning Wish. So I think it's just those two cards. Even in the sideboard, I'm not sure. I don't think anything deals with a Resolve Permanent that way. So needs to start with those two cards. Is going to need to chain together a number of spells and then have the second Brain Freeze to mill out Cameron. I think that is Marc's game plan. While he's only going to have, looks like 4 turns to do that. And I would say like if the Powder Keg comes too late, you need number of turns to get that into play. And that one's pretty easily answered with a card like Seal Cleansing. So it's really kind of Boomerang or nothing. So on its surface, it seems like a really grim proposition, but Flash of Insight does a decent job of digging deep. I mean, Impulse also sees 4 cards at a time, so that was a deep Flash of Insight. I didn't see exactly how it was. It looked like 10 or 11. But I think we're looking for a Boomerang. I mean, I think I would Marc. I think I'd be cashing in these Phyrexian Furnace. Like, I don't think there's two things that, like, I guess I don't know exactly what cards are on the bottom of the library as compared to like what's on the top. That like if a Replenish were to resolve, like what would be the difference? But one, like the game is going to end if a Meddling Mage beats you down, and so I think it's important to maybe turn those Phyrexian Furnaces into cards, and that might give you a shot. Especially, I guess now maybe the time has passed, given that it like the Powder Keg is now too slow, I think. So now like Powder Keg here, you go down to 4, it goes up to 1, you go down to 2. Maybe Powder Keg's here, it's enough. Okay, so Powder Keg here. Cameron would attack him on down to 4. It would go up to 1. He'd attack for 2. It would go up to 2. So he could go to 2. He could be at 2 when this Powder Keg's at 2. And so this Powder Keg is just in the nick of time, but like again, if there's a card like Seal Cleansing, or I mean we've seen Stifle. I guess how many copies of Stifle were in Cameron's list? Because we've seen one I know one got milled. I think there's only one copy of Stifle in the 75 for Cameron. So Stifle not an option, but a card like Seal Cleansing I think is really good here. All right, Marc is down to 2 with that powder. So Cameron looking for a seal cleansing here. And if this powder keg resolves, okay, so Impulse is going to find a card for Marc. He'll put that counter back on top of his deck as he does not want to forget this powder keg trigger. And he is still going to keep those Phyrexian Furnaces in play. All right, so okay, so powder keg at 2, and there's no seal cleansing. So I think this powder keg is safe to get rid of this Meddling Mage. Yes, okay, so that's activated. The Meddling Mage is down. So I think we've taken care of all 3 Meddling Mages, and now Marc is now at 2 life. So presumably now the cards that matter are cards like Replenish for the time being. I mean, eventually, I guess I don't know exactly what's in Cameron's graveyard. The Phyrexian Furnaces have been chipping away, but a card like Opalescence is a card that also is something that Marc needs to worry about, because then every enchantment is a threat. Replenish is going to come down. Marc is going to float 2 mana and then Gush. And does Marc have an immediate answer for this Replenish? Look like a Boomerang. Oh, that's an Impulse. Okay. So Impulse makes more draws live of counterspells and foils. I mean, also, like, we still have 2 activations for the bottom cards of the Phyrexian Furnace, and then we could activate it twice, both of them, to target certain cards. So, I mean, the Cameron's deck has gotten a lot smaller, or his graveyard has gotten a lot smaller. He does have a counterspell, so that's a clean way to deal with it. I mean, this looks much more promising for Marc. Gonna activate 2 Phyrexian Furnaces then a turn. Draw, play an island, pass the turn. I think Cameron's looking to jam like another card like Replenish, or I think Opalescence is probably his best bet here. All right, so 2 more cards are going to get exiled. Look like a Frantic Search and an Opalescence. I think the advantage might be swinging towards Cameron. We see a Portent. It's going to target Marc. I guess there is some merit to maybe targeting Cameron, but maybe I'm always the one that's more excited about that than everybody else. Cards are going to stay, and Marc's going to pass the turn and draw an extra card. I'm trying to see like how many cards I think are left in Cameron's deck. And it does look like there is still a chunk, but he's kind of running out of threats. Because Replenish almost now seems like it's not enough because the graveyard is getting very, very small. All right. Cameron will add a land, and then 2 more cards get exiled, and an impulse at end of turn. Yeah, I do agree that this is a point where I think it's turned that like Marc has weathered the storm, and I think he has had the time and the resources to find the protection he needs. A card like Replenish is not effective, I think, because the furnaces have whittled away the graveyard, and Cameron basically needs to have first Opalescence, which I don't even know how many he has left because I don't know how many have been exiled. But we get to see a hand, a very, very unexciting hand. It is like six lands and a Swords of Plowshares. That is wow. Okay. So Cameron has a whole lot of nothing. And I think Marc gets to sit up in his chair a little bit because I think this is, well, he was already confident in his position. It now has almost gone to like easy mode because there's just nothing there. Are we? I saw a showing of hands. I guess I assume Marc was. I mean, there was a vision charm in there that at least would be able to mill. I guess. What were we? I'm a little confused. I'm just gonna listen in the players real quick. Okay, so I mean, I think Cameron's getting up to go to the bathroom real quick. I do think we are going to a new game. I guess I didn't see like the actual resolution, like what happened. I think maybe the players had just discussed and said like, okay, we understand what's happening at this game at this point. But just the way that like the hands were kind of plopped down was kind of unusual to me. I'm going to go back to the deck list real quick. I'm going to look at Cameron's list. So we had seen all 3 Meddling Mages. We saw a Stifle. I thought maybe I had seen a Fact or Fiction, but I'm not sure. The cards I didn't see from Cameron. I don't know what cards he took out. I guess. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure which cards you would prioritize less. Intuition, maybe. Maybe that's a card you take out because when you have to go get a card, that's usually for like the matchups that like don't have permission. So maybe Intuition is a card that gets cut. We also did see Orim Chant come in, so. All right. Looks like players are making some adjustments to their deck. As we go to a game number 4. So yeah, I think we did see. Did we see a Dreadnought get discarded at all by Marc in that game? I can't remember. But it did look like he was more set on the Brain Freeze plan. All right, so Cameron gets to be on the play here. He won the first game that was on the play. He won the second game where Marc was on the draw, and then he lost the first sideboard game where Marc was, won the second game where Marc was on the play, and then he lost the third game where Marc was on the play for the first sideboard game. So the card like Orim's Chant is a really safe card in this matchup because it kind of just works on every aspect of like the critical turn of these games. So if we look at it from if Cameron is trying to resolve a Replenish, he can do a test spell of I'm going to play this Orim's Chant, and if it resolves, then I know my Replenish is going to resolve. So that's like mode 1. It can be used defensively if Marc is trying to go for a Dreadnought. He could, in response to a Dreadnought, cast an Orim's Chant, and then if Marc doesn't counter that, then he's not able to cast a Vision Charm or a Stifle, and the Dreadnought would die. Or even then, there's a point where if Marc is playing a bunch of spells in a turn, Cameron could proactively cast an Orim's Chant to maybe prevent a brain freeze from being too devastating. So a lot of different aspects and times that you could use Orim's Chant in this matchup. I mean, I guess even if you talk about the kicker, there might be a chance where preventing a Dreadnought from attacking could come into play. Looks like Marc is sending his initial hand back, mulliganing in this game number 4. And I do believe that Cameron's keeping his opening 7, so Replenish looking to be at full strength while the Stiflenought list is searching for a better 6-card hand. Chad has asked, does the Knot deck have Tides in the board? So no, it does not. And that is, I know Marc had talked about, I don't know if he had written it in his profile or if he was talking to me about it. I think he said he was interested in trying it, but he's not been a fan of Chain of Vapor, which is usually used in conjunction with the Parallax Tide. So he does not have Parallax Tide in his 75. Which I think that would definitely like make this matchup different. That Marc would be able to find a spot if he could resolve a Parallax Tide. That would open up the door for him to resolve a Dreadnought and just win in 2 turns. But no, he does not have that available to him. We have a Phyrexian Furnace that is going to get cast, but Annul is at the ready for Cameron. So we saw Phyrexian Furnace do a lot of whittling away in the first or that last game. It's not going to happen nearly as much because there's only one other copy of the Furnace. And was that the second one that got mana leaked? I think so. So both Furnaces down, and Marc has been stuck at 1 mana after he spent the first few turns trying to cast a Furnace that both of them got countered. So yeah, at this point, like Cameron just needs to develop mana and then find a mana leak, because I think maybe you get to a point where you just say, I'm not going to respect a card like Foil, but I think you kind of have to, or maybe there gets to a point where Marc has 2 mana by the time you get what you need and Replenish. Marc is going to play an Ivory Tower. All right, so this is not a card that would be very good against like a combo of like where you attack in big chunks, but we did see Meddling Mage in the previous games do like provide a clock against Marc. So here, Ivory Tower is a way to counteract that. So interesting, interesting way to kind of fight the Meddling Mage. Not something that maybe I would have initially thought, but I can see the reasoning behind it. Right. Well, Parallax Tide is going to come down. It's going to exile the one land that Marc has. That's going to clear the way for Opalescence. And now, when I talked about chunks, maybe not as big of a chunk as maybe I initially thought, but just being able to deal 4 is pretty good. The Ivory Tower will replenish Marc's life by 2, but here now we're able to attack for 4 more. Oh, yes, and then up to 18. So I think Cameron is going to look to add to the board. Really is really what I think is best thing he could do, especially when Marc doesn't have any mana. So with Marc so light on mana, it probably also means that has a lot of spells. I mean, that doesn't take a lot to figure out, as he's discarding a Gush to hand size. But also just means like if Cameron's able to kind of like strike when the iron's hot, then he knows his spells are going to be able to resolve. Also, a card like Foil in the spot like just means that oh, I'm moving the wrong life total. A card like Foil would reduce the efficiency of Ivory Tower. All right, so I guess the best news for Marc is that after this Parallax Tide and then Opalescence has come down, that Cameron has spent a couple of turns of just attacking. So the Parallax Tide is going to go to 0 counters. And now we have another Opalescence. Okay, so this allows the other Opalescence to attack. I was going to say if it were Wave, that would be a lot better, but so if Marc is thinking, that means he must have a foil in his hand, because I don't think any of the 0 mana plays, well, Misdirection I think is the only other one, but not having any mana obviously limits the amount of the cards that he'd be able to interact with. Yep, so we do see a foil discarding an island. Very interesting. So I was thinking before that islands weren't being played because Marc didn't have them, and maybe he was doing it because he wouldn't be able to utilize the mana because of Parallax Tide, but also maybe he was keeping an island in hand for an emergency foil. So Impulse and Island get discarded, and then the Parallax Tide is going to attack one more time. Ivory Tower not going to gain any life, and Marc is going to think about adding an island? Question mark? Yes, does play an island. All right. Cameron goes to his turn. The other island comes back finally. Marc says, I finally have 2 mana. I can counter a spell you play. Maybe I will have to counter an Orim's Chant. So this is likely going to be an Orim's Chant followed up with, it could be a Parallax Wave, it could be a Parallax Tide, it could be a Replenish. But I'm guessing, which 4 mana spell is it? It is Replenish. So this gets back, I think, is it just the Wave? Sorry, the Tide and Opalescence. Okay. Well, get to attack for 4. And the Tide is going to take care of those 2 lands. Marc isn't able to use that mana this turn because of the Orim's Chant. And we are showing 12 points of power. From this spot, I don't know if Marc has anything to do here. I think this is going to be our game, set, and match for Cameron. Mark's going to draw a card. Doesn't gain any life for the Ivory Tower. Going to look at the cards in his hand. Can I do anything with no mana? I cannot. That will be the game. That will be the match. Replenish takes it down in the hands of Cameron. So we have another Replenish deck moving on. Let's jump down to the players. I'll unmute them, see if we can listen to them chatting, and we'll talk to the players. Chat, if you have any questions for our players, put them in the chat, and maybe I can ask them. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
I was in a tough spot because I was looking at 6 cards, right? And I had an island and a bunch of spells that I could cast. So, like, it's hard to throw that back and go to 5. But then I just, like, didn't see a land, didn't see a cantrip. So, couldn't really do anything. Yeah. It's pretty.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It happens. I should shuffle better.
Oh my goodness.
I think I sideboarded like that. All right. Well, I guess we have to unmute Mike because he's
like, unmute me, please.
Yeah, hey, sorry, we were a little slow to the party.
No, that's fine. I always say, like, I'm just able to unmute, and then you guys are just talking in the chat, so that's fine. What cards did you take out, Mark? Like, did you have any of the Dreadnoughts in the deck?
Yeah, I had one Dreadnought.
Okay.
In for the sideboard games.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that I know I've played before, and I sideboarded out all of them, and I think that was a mistake.
Yeah, because it's so he named the first Meddling Mage named Dreadnought,
mm-hmm.
And I bottomed it like super early in the game. The problem is that when you only have one, it kind of takes you a while to dig to it if you need it.
Sure.
Because he named Brain Freeze with the second Meddling Mage. So at that point, before I had the second Powder Keg, I was like, well, all right, now I really need my Dreadnought, but it's on the bottom of my library.
So one thing in that third game I thought was really interesting was you kind of fired off that first Brain Freeze like in the I'll say it's the mid game. I don't know what it was, but like before you had things like locked up, and you had a Phyrexian Furnace, so it was kind of like working at ends, and it's kind of like. So were you a little bit worried about? I guess it was hard for me to keep track exactly what was in the graveyard, anyways. But like, were you worried about that Brain Freeze giving all the tools that Cameron needed for Replenish to be a game-winning card, or did you just feel like I just had to counter any Replenish anyways?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I had the furnaces. I would have had the mana to at least do 2 spot removals, right? You know, if he casts Replenish, I can sacrifice each of them to remove at least 2 things. Okay. So like, you know, so I can probably keep him off of Opalescence, or, you know, depending on what the 18 cards are, right? And I think at that point in the game it was just Brain Freeze Island in my hand. I didn't really have anything going on, and I thought, okay, if I saved it for too long, it would be irrelevant.
Okay. And then the other thing was like when that Meddling Mage, you were at like 6 life or whatever, and so I think the only cards that you like were to get you out were Powder Keg and Boomerang, and the Powder Keg had to be, I think, on the turn that you played it.
Yeah, I cast it as late as possible.
Okay. I was saying, I didn't know if it was something that like maybe you were waiting to the very last possible moment, because I mean, in general,
I was digging really hard, and I just couldn't find a Boomerang or a Powder Keg until I don't think I held it. I don't remember holding it at all, so I might have found it at the 11th hour.
Okay. What was said at the end of that game, like when that peak was shown, and it's just like, Cameron, you're like, I got 6 lands and a swords, and then Mark's hand came down, and then like I was kind of like, I assume Mark won that game, but like that was kind of a weird way, like not being able to hear you guys. So what was the interaction, how that game concluded?
So he kind of chuckled. He's like, I was not expecting that, and I was like, well, yeah. If you show me a brain freeze, it's scoop time. And
Okay.
he's like, oh yeah, I got one.
Okay,
And so-
I saw the vision charm. I didn't see the brain freeze when the hand tipped down. So okay,
Yeah. But I also had the Dreadnought, and he only had one answer, and I had like 2 or 3 counters. So
okay.
yeah, it was the Dreadnought probably would have finished the game quicker, I think. But either way,
Yeah. So how much have you guys played this matchup? Is this something you guys are like really familiar with, or like somewhat familiar with, or is it more theory than anything?
What I would say is pre-board, like the mono blue Stiflenought, I'm pretty familiar. Post-board, particularly with like the innovations of like Parallax Tide, I am not nearly as familiar. And actually, one of the reasons I specifically joined the Fall Brawl is I wanted reps against this deck, because I put Annuls in the sideboard specifically for it.
Okay.
Which is kind of counterintuitive in Replenish because there's no synergy and you've got 3 sealed cleansings. But it was really very specifically for Parallax Tide, which I know Marc doesn't play. But I ended up having one in on game 4, or excuse me, in game 3, and then I ended up moving the second one in game 4. I once he was pretty much clearly not gonna it felt like he wasn't gonna trick me with like an early Dreadnought in those later games. I started siding out pretty much all my swords.
So Marc, my question is like on the pre-boarded games, are you, I guess, given the number of cards that Cameron has, that he has Swords to Plowshares, Seal Cleansing, in some aspects Mana Leak, and then also Parallax Wave, those are all cards that can like interact with a Dreadnought.
yeah.
Are you ever willing to like just jam a Dreadnought in game 1 or 2?
No, but I kind of play conservative anyway against any opponent, but I wouldn't jam it against an opponent that has so many answers. I mean, unless I had, if I had 2 counters, I guess that's not really jamming it, right? But
Sure.
But yeah, if I had 2 counters, I would do it.
Okay. Yeah, because the first few games, it felt like you were kind of forced into. It's weird because you have to play conservative, but you also have to play reactive because like Cameron's applying pressure, so he's going to whittle away some of your counter spells anyways, and that also gives him more time to draw answers. So the first few games, it seems kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't, no matter like whether you play fast or slow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my intuition is like Marc's list doesn't play days. And, really, I mean, my feel in this matchup pre-board is Replenish is favored in the long game, but is afraid of a turn 2 jam with, multiple counter backups. And without those dazes, it did make me feel a tad bit more comfortable just in the early sequencing.
Okay.
Yeah, it feels like an uphill battle, I think. I mean, I played against Rich in the playoffs of a few months ago. We did a best of 5, and I think it was the same outcome, like 1 game to 3. So I won 1, he won 3. And it just felt like, the game I got him was like turn 2 Dreadnought with backup, right? But the other games just felt really tough, because he has a lot of answers. I think Rich plays 2 swords, but he still had answers. And, Mana Leak, like you said, Mana Leak's live for quite a while. So that's an answer until like mid-game, late game. Because, you got to, at the bare minimum, right, you need 2 mana to Dreadnought. So then are you waiting until you have 5 mana to jam it, to play around Mana Leak? But then if he has Mana Leak Plow, then you're still in trouble, Yeah.
So the one of Cunning Wish in the main, is that
It's a fun off.
Okay, I guess so. Like looking at your sideboard, it's kind of like I don't know what the go-to target is, or is it more of just like a way of if you play against like a game 1 Meddling Mage that you have a way to Cunning Wish for a Brain Freeze for a way to win?
That's pretty much it. So my thought here is like some matchups are tough, right? Because they have a lot of answers. I know not a lot of people play Landstill, for example, but I faced it at Lopshicon, and there's decks like that. They just have like a million answers. And so if your entire game plan is relying on a artifact that dies to like 1,000 pieces of removal that everybody's playing, you're still going to get there a lot of the time because you have counters, but I'm not playing dazes, right? So like, I don't know. Yeah, it was just sort of a way of thinking about I've been toying with this list and just tweaking, and I would not say this is optimized, but anyway, yeah, Cunning Wish is
a cool list.
Thanks. And the Hibernation is actually really good in the right matchup. It's really good against like Call Herd, and that's a card that I've been struggling to beat. Just if somebody just goes like call 3, call 4, or turn 3, turn 4, call, and I can't. I feel like I lost a lot of games at Lopshicon and in the webcam monthlies to that card. So yeah, I was trying out Hibernation, but I didn't want to main deck it, obviously. So the Cunning Wish kind of gives you, and then if you're playing against, Mono Red Slayer Goblins, you can always get a
blue blast.
Yeah. So, and then it's got the misdirection. So like if you're in a pickle where, you only have 3 mana and they plow your Dreadnought and there's another creature on the battlefield, or they disenchant your Dreadnought and there's another enchantment or artifact, right? It's like, it's in that scenario can be pretty good, I think.
Mm-hmm. Cameron, chat is interested in Riftstone Portal. They say, how hard is it to get active / discarded consistently?
It is. It's hit or miss, but I mean, when you get to a mid game, and I feel like that's really where it shines, where you're like, okay, I took an early 6 to 8 damage off in an Ancient Tomb, and I'm just casting Attunement, turn after turn. That's where it really, really shines, because a lot of times you're in a spot where your life is at a premium, and you can't wait that extra turn to play that extra land, and being able to tap the Ancient Tomb for a white can be powerful. But I mean, it doesn't come up obviously every game, but it's been a noticeable difference. For me, I mean, it's definitely saved me enough life for me to want to play one, versus having that. The flip side of that is having an Ancient Tomb plus Riftstone Portal draw, and you're like, oh my goodness, I've got an extra colorless source, and now I have to mull again.
Yeah, do you know?
So I mean, that's a trade-off.
From most lists, do you know what card that is? Is it a spell or is it a land or?
I think it's a land. So I'm on 25 lands. I think it's a basic. It's
okay.
Depending on, it's either basic plains or basic island.
Okay. Yeah, that's all the questions I see specifically for the chat. Yeah, I guess, how are each of you like feeling going into this matchup? I would say, like, I feel like there's a decent amount of play to this matchup. Like, I mean, I think it's an uphill battle for the Stiflenought list, but it's not something it necessarily can't overcome. But at least you have a plan, I guess. But maybe you guys feel differently.
I mean, I feel like, games 2 and 3, if it was a best out of 3, I mean, I think Marc, I think it's around 50-50. I mean, where I'm maybe favored pre-board. I don't know. I'm interested in your thoughts, Marc.
I find that, so in a pre-boarded game, going first matters a lot. Maybe matters a little less now that I'm off of days, but if I'm on days, then I feel like I have to go first to make days work. And then, yeah, I don't know. I agree. I agree with what you said. I think it feels like an uphill battle. I'm not sure. I honestly couldn't tell you if it gets weaker or stronger in a sideboard game, right? We're both bringing in annuls. You know, I do get the brain freeze plan, but I kind of already have it game one with the Cunning Wish. So if I didn't have that as like an entire line, but then he doesn't have the Meddling Mages, right? So
yeah, I was like, Cameron, you do get to bring in a good number of cards that are pretty impactful. So
yeah.
Yeah.
The Ivory Tower was definitely, you know, an interesting play though, because, you know, I didn't fully appreciate it, I think, till perhaps that last game where it's like, oh hey, I just can't sit back and beat him for 2 with the Meddling Mage to death.
Yeah. And that's what it's there for. You know, it cancels out, you know, it cancels out a call token. It nets you life against Mage. It, you know, or even if they have like a 4/4 and you're getting 3, whatever it is, there were so many games at LobsterCon, especially, where it just kept me alive, you know, while I was digging. It gives me, you know, a few more turns to dig, sometimes a lot more turns. And then I know I wasn't playing days in this, but like at LobsterCon, I was on days, and you can do some really crazy end of turn stuff with Gush and days, but mostly Gush. You know, you could be at 8 cards at the end of your turn because of a Portent. That happens all the time, so you gain 4 a lot. And then the other thing is, you know, if you Gush at the end of the turn, if you have 7 cards and you Gush, you go up to 10, right? And now you're gaining 6. Like, and I don't think people really, they're not thinking about that, right? Because they haven't played against it. So they get, like, the first time you do it, they're like, oh shit, this guy's getting 6. Like,
yeah,
like that changes my entire plan. Like I had like a roadmap, you know, and now it's all shit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It does it really shine in the red deck matchups?
In which one?
Like just
against red decks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I played it against LobsterCon. I got paired up against Burn or Sly, and I only had one on the board, and I was very fortunate to draw it early. It might have even, I can't remember if it was, I think I played it on turn 2 with Vision Charm backup because I didn't want him to overload it. And then he ended up throwing 2 overloads and a red blast at one of my Vision Charms. So he burned like 3 spells trying to kill the fucking thing because he knew if it sat there, you know, he was in a lot of trouble. And I just had enough answers. I Vision Charmed his first overload, and then I think I Vision Charmed his second overload. He blasted my Vision Charm, and then I blasted his blast or something. And as soon as that play happened, he just like sighed and was like, well, I'm in a lot of trouble now.
It's like a 5th Dreadnought. Jeez.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that answers all the questions for the match. Mark, since you have unfortunately been eliminated, is there anything you want to add? Experiences about the tournament or anything you just want to say while you're on air at this point?
Well, thanks for streaming and putting this all together. I know it's a lot of work, and you know, I appreciate it a lot. You know, I've never played it until now, or at least not on a stream match, and it's a really great opportunity. I love the community. I've had some great opponents, some really interesting deck lists, just a lot of cool people. So I'm really having fun, even when I lose.
Yeah, Cameron, we will see you at least in the semifinals. But is there anything you want to add right now?
You know, just to echo Mark's sentiment, you know, just thank you so much for putting on this tournament. It's definitely cool to jam with the community, and love watching you stream.
All right, well, thank you very much. But yeah, I think with that, I think we'll let your players go. I know you guys have some stuff to do, so but want to thank you for fitting in this match, and congratulations, Cameron, and also Mark. Job well done. But yeah. So we'll be figuring out when whoever your opponent is going to be, Cameron. I guess you're looking at the winner of Will and Brian. Is that correct? I think so. That match will be played this evening. We're going to be playing it at 9 or 10:30 Eastern is when we're going to start the match. So a very late night
Awesome.
match. So if
I will be watching.
all right. But yeah, we'll wrap up this stream. But yeah, thank you, players. But until next time, take care.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.